What do the Hanging Gardens and the world's first written laws have in common? They were born in a city every empire tried to erase. A city that stood between rivers and refused to disappear. Babylon was not just conquered once, it was conquered again and again. Burned, rebuilt, humiliated, restored. And yet its name survived longer than the empires that tried to destroy it. This is not a story of one king or one war. This is the story of a city that outlived power itself. Before Babylon ruled empires, it learned how empires fall, long before its walls rose high. Its memory grew deep, between the Tigris and Euphrates. Rivers where floods could destroy harvests and kings could vanish overnight. Survival demanded more than strength. It demanded order, law, belief, and identity. While other cities ruled by fear, Babylon ruled by ideas, and ideas do not die when armies march. This is not a tale of legend or fantasy. This is the true story of Babylon. The city empires could not kill. Before Babylon was a name carved into stone, before it was spoken with fear or awe, before empires marched toward it believing they could claim it. The land itself existed as the first master, stretching quietly between two unpredictable rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates, rivers that gave life and took it away without warning. Rivers that flooded without mercy and receded without apology, shaping not only the soil, but the minds of the people who dared to live beside them. This land was not gentle. It demanded planning, memory, and cooperation. And those who survived here learned early that strength alone was not enough. Because muscles could not stop floods and weapons could not command seasons, only knowledge could. Long before Babylon had walls, it had farmers watching the sky. Long before it had soldiers, it had workers digging canals, measuring land, and calculating time. Survival here required order, and order became the first form of power. While elsewhere humans wandered and hunted, here they settled. Not because it was easy, but because it was possible. The soil was rich, but only if controlled. The water abundant, but only if guided. And so the earliest communities learned to bend nature without breaking it. They learned to cooperate or perish. And cooperation slowly became civilization. Villages appeared, then towns, then cities whose names would one day echo through history. Uruk, Lagash, Eridu. Places that rose centuries before Babylon mattered. Places built by the Sumerians. A people whose language belonged to no one else, whose gods demanded rituals, whose kings ruled not by brute force but by divine order. They built temples that touched the sky and invented writing to speak across time. Clay tablets preserved their thoughts, their laws, their fears, their debts, and their prayers. The idea that power could be recorded and remembered changed everything. Because memory is stronger than violence, kingdoms rise and fall, but records remain. And the Sumerians understood this long before empires did. Babylon watched all of this from the shadows. At first nothing more than a modest settlement along a canal connected to the Euphrates. Strategically placed, but politically insignificant. No towering temples, no famous kings, no epic victories, just land, water, and potential. While greater cities dominated religion and trade, Babylon learned quietly, absorbing culture, language, and systems, waiting without knowing it was waiting. Then came the Akkadians, led by Sargon of Akkad, the first man to unite much of Mesopotamia under a single rule. His empire was built on conquest, not cooperation, and it proved that power could be centralized, that cities could be forced into obedience, and that ambition had no natural limits. Babylon existed within this empire but did not define it, again overshadowed, again observing, learning how empires functioned and how they collapsed. Because collapse always follows ambition. After the Akkadian Empire fractured under pressure from internal revolts and external invasions, the land returned to chaos. City-states rose again. The third dynasty of Ur tried to restore order through bureaucracy, laws, and standardization. Roads were built, taxes recorded, labor organized, and for a time stability returned. Babylon remained a provincial town, administered rather than celebrated, but stability is fragile. And when Ur fell under pressure from Elamites, Amorites, and internal strain, the system shattered once more, power fragmented, and into that fragmentation stepped opportunity. Because history is not shaped by peace, but by what follows collapse. Amorite tribes moved in from the west, once dismissed as outsiders, now becoming rulers, blending with the culture they entered rather than destroying it. Babylon was perfectly positioned for this moment, not the strongest city, not the richest, but central, connected, adaptable. When Amorite leaders took control, Babylon finally gained its own kings, not conquerors yet, but planners. Men who understood that cities survive not by expansion alone, but by identity. Canals were repaired, walls strengthened, temples rebuilt, and slowly Babylon began to define itself, not as the oldest city or the most sacred, but as the most balanced. Political ambition fused with religious symbolism, administrative control supported by cultural continuity. While other cities clung to ancient prestige, Babylon embraced transformation. Its god Marduk rose alongside the city, elevated from local deity to divine symbol of order and authority. Power and belief became inseparable, and this fusion would become Babylon's greatest strength. Because cities can be burned, but belief travels. Laws can be erased, but ideas adapt. Babylon was not loud in its rise. It did not announce itself with conquest or terror. It grew patient, strategic, and resilient, learning from every empire that failed before it. Learning that survival required more than victory. It required memory, adaptability, and meaning. By the time the world began to notice Babylon, it was already prepared, shaped by centuries of observation, failure, inheritance, and quiet ambition. It had no illusion of immortality, only the understanding that empires die quickly, but cities that learn how to endure can outlive them all. Babylon did not yet rule the world, but it had learned how the world works, and that knowledge would soon make it dangerous. Long before Babylon learned how to rule, long before its name carried weight, the land between the rivers had already given birth to something the world had never seen before. a people who did not conquer by sword but by invention. The Sumerians were not an empire, they were a beginning, emerging slowly from the same unforgiving landscape that would later shape Babylon. They settled where survival demanded intelligence, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where floods erased fields and droughts punished mistakes. And in responding to this chaos, they created order, not as an abstract idea, but as a daily necessity. Canals were dug by hand, irrigation systems mapped carefully, and cooperation became law before laws were written. Villages expanded into cities, because isolation meant death and community meant survival. Cities like Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur rose not as monuments to power, but as solutions to shared problems. Each city built around temples that served not only as religious centers but as economic and administrative hearts, where grain was stored, labor organized, and justice administered. The Sumerians believed the gods owned the land and humans were caretakers, and this belief shaped everything. Kings ruled not as divine beings, but as stewards, responsible for maintaining balance between heaven and earth. And balance was fragile, which is why ritual, law, and tradition mattered more than brute force. One of the Sumerians' greatest inventions was writing, born not from poetry, but from accounting. Clay tablets pressed with symbols recorded debts, harvests, offerings, and agreements. Because memory was power, and written memory was permanent power, this single invention transformed human society. Decisions could outlive leaders, laws could outlast kings, and identity could survive conquest. Alongside writing came mathematics, calendars, astronomy, and standardized measurements. Tools designed to predict floods, track seasons, and organize labor. But in doing so, they also taught humans to think abstractly, to see patterns, and to imagine control over time itself. Monumental architecture followed. Ziggurats rose above cities as artificial mountains connecting Earth to the divine. Visible proof that humans could shape their environment on a grand scale. These structures were not built quickly. They required planning across generations, reinforcing the idea that civilization was a long-term project, not a single act of conquest. Sumerian religion reflected this worldview. Their gods were powerful, but unpredictable, demanding constant attention, offerings, and obedience. Because chaos always waited just beyond the city walls. Myths spoke of floods that destroyed the world, of gods who punished arrogance, and of heroes who failed despite strength, teaching humility in a landscape that rewarded none. Politically, the Sumerians never unified into a single empire. Each city-state guarded its independence fiercely, and rivalries often turned violent. But even war followed rules. Treaties were recorded, boundaries defined, and victory required legitimacy as much as force. This fragmentation meant constant competition, but it also created resilience. When one city fell, others survived, and knowledge flowed between them, creating a shared cultural system stronger than any single ruler. Babylon existed within this world as a small settlement on the periphery, absorbing Sumerian language, religion, law, and administration without shaping them yet. Akkadian, a Semitic language, gradually spread alongside Sumerian. creating a bilingual culture where tradition and adaptation coexisted. This blending would later define Babylonian identity. But at this stage, Babylon was still learning, watching older cities rise and fall, seeing how sacred prestige did not guarantee survival, and how innovation often mattered more than ancestry. The eventual decline of Sumerian dominance was slow, not sudden. Internal rivalries weakened city-states, resources were stretched, and external pressures mounted. When Sargon of Akkad built the first true empire by conquering the Sumerian cities, he did not erase them, he absorbed them, using their systems to rule, proving that Sumerian civilization was too useful to destroy. Even in defeat, their ideas survived, shaping every power that followed, including Babylon. The fall of Sumer was not an end but a transformation. Their cities lost independence, but their culture became immortal. Their laws informed future codes. Their gods were merged into new pantheons, and their writing became the foundation of administration across Mesopotamia. Babylon's later greatness would be impossible without this inheritance. Because cities do not rise from nothing, they rise by collecting what others leave behind. The Sumerians built the tools. Babylon would later wield them. And although the Sumerians never ruled an empire, they built civilization itself, a legacy, far stronger than conquest. And in the shadow of their temples and tablets, Babylon quietly prepared for its own ascent, carrying forward the lessons of cooperation, memory, law, and belief that would one day allow it to survive when empires tried to erase it. Babylon did not explode into history like a conquering army. It emerged quietly, shaped by geography rather than glory, growing not from myth but from necessity. Long after Sumerian cities had already defined civilization, Babylon remained a modest settlement positioned along a canal branching from the Euphrates River. Neither the richest nor the most sacred place in Mesopotamia, but central, connected, and patient. Its earliest inhabitants were farmers, traders, and administrators who understood movement, water, and exchange better than dominance. Because Babylon sat between older powers, Kish to the north, Nippur to the east, and Uruk to the south, cities whose temples commanded religious authority and whose names carried weight. Babylon learned to survive by serving, by facilitating trade, by managing canals, and by absorbing ideas without challenging prestige. This position shaped its character early. It became a place where languages mixed, Sumerian and Akkadian spoken, side by side, where scribes learned both traditions, and where compromise was more valuable than confrontation. While other cities competed for divine favor, Babylon quietly accumulated practical power, the ability to move goods, people, and information across Mesopotamia. And this kind of power rarely announces itself until it is too late to stop. The earliest textual mention of Babylon appears during the Akkadian period under the reign of Shar-Koli-Shari, a reminder that even when empires rose, Babylon existed within them, not resisting, not dominating, but enduring. The Akkadian Empire, founded by Sargon of Akkad, was the first to show that Mesopotamia could be ruled as a single political unit, and Babylon watched closely as centralized authority reshaped the region. Learning how conquest created order quickly, but destroyed loyalty just as fast. When the Akkadian system collapsed under pressure from rebellion and invasion, Babylon remained. Not powerful enough to be targeted, not weak enough to vanish, surviving the chaos that followed. Then came the third dynasty of Ur, a state built not on fear but bureaucracy. Rulers like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi standardized measurements, issued laws, organized labor, and built roads that stitched the land together. Babylon again became part of something larger, administered rather than celebrated, governed rather than glorified. Yet this period mattered deeply because it trained Babylon in administration, record-keeping, and compliance with centralized systems. It learned how states functioned from the inside, how taxes were collected, how labor was mobilized, how legitimacy was constructed, and when. The Ur-Free State finally collapsed around 2000 BCE under pressure from Elamite invasions, Amorite migrations, and internal economic strain. The region shattered once more. Power fragmented into dozens of competing city-states, and for the first time Babylon stood on equal ground, no longer overshadowed by ancient capitals or bound by imperial systems. This was the moment when survival turned into ambition. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people long dismissed as outsiders, had been settling across Mesopotamia for generations, blending into local cultures while retaining their own leadership structures. And in the chaos following Ur's collapse, they seized opportunity, taking control of cities through gradual assimilation rather than violent takeover. Babylon fell under Amorite leadership around the early 19th century BCE. And with that shift came its first independent dynasty, the rise of local kings, who ruled Babylon not as governors or servants, but as sovereigns. The first of these, Shungwabam, is traditionally remembered as the founder of Babylon's dynasty. Though little is known of his reign, his importance lies not in conquest, but in continuity. Because from this moment onward, Babylon had something it never had before: a ruling house invested in its future. His successors fortified the city, expanded irrigation, secured farmland, and defended trade routes. Not dramatic victories, but essential ones. Because cities are built by supply lines before armies. During this period, Babylon began transforming from a settlement into a city-state. Its walls grew, its temples gained prominence, and its administrative systems matured. Scribes recorded transactions in Akkadian using cuneiform inherited from Sumerian tradition. Blending old systems with new leadership, religion also shifted subtly but decisively. Babylon's local god Marduk began to rise in importance. Initially a minor deity, he was gradually elevated by Babylon's kings. His cult expanded, his myths rewritten to place him at the center of cosmic order. This was not accidental. It was strategy, because elevating Marduk elevated Babylon, tying divine authority directly to the city's political ambition. While older cities clung to ancient gods whose power was tied to fading prestige, Babylon reshaped belief to match its ascent. This alignment of religion and politics became one of its defining traits, and it distinguished Babylon from rivals who relied solely on military strength or inherited sanctity. The city also benefited from its geography in this new political landscape. Centrally located, connected by rivers and canals, Babylon became a hub for diplomacy, trade, and negotiation. Rulers from neighboring states interacted with it constantly. Alliances formed and dissolved. Marriages secured peace. Treaties recorded fragile agreements. And Babylon learned to navigate this volatile environment without exhausting itself in endless war. It was growing smarter, not just stronger. By the time Babylon entered the 18th century BCE, it was no longer an overlooked town, but a rising city-state with a clear identity, stable leadership, religious legitimacy, and administrative competence. Its rise had been slow, deliberate, and almost invisible. But that invisibility was its shield, because while other cities fought for dominance and destroyed one another, Babylon consolidated quietly, preparing for a moment when patience would be rewarded. That moment would come with the reign of Hammurabi. But Babylon's true birth had already occurred long before he wore the crown. It was born in the shadows, shaped by centuries of observation, survival, and adaptation, proving that the most dangerous cities are not those that rise fastest, but those that learn how to wait. When Babylon was still learning how to exist, another force had already learned how to dominate. The Akkadian Empire did not rise slowly or quietly. It arrived through conquest, ambition, and a man who believed the world could be unified under one rule. Sargon of Akkad, a figure surrounded by legend, seized power around the 23rd century before the Common Era, and did something no one had ever done before. He conquered city after city and bound them into a single political system, turning Mesopotamia from a patchwork of independent city-states into an empire. This was a transformation so profound that even Babylon, still small and unremarkable, would be shaped by its consequences. The Akkadian Empire was built on military strength, but it survived through administration. Sargon understood that conquest without control collapses quickly, so he adopted Sumerian systems of writing, taxation, and religious legitimacy. Akkadian rulers presented themselves as chosen by the gods, protectors of order, and masters of chaos. The language of power shifted. Akkadian replaced Sumerian as the dominant spoken tongue of administration. Yet Sumerian remained sacred and scholarly, creating a dual culture that would later define Babylon itself. Babylon existed within this empire as a minor settlement, administered rather than celebrated, governed rather than feared. But this position offered something more valuable than glory. It offered observation. Babylon watched how the Akkadians ruled, how armies moved, how governors enforced authority, how rebellion was punished, and how loyalty was manufactured through propaganda and religion. It learned that empires rely not only on violence, but on narrative, on convincing the conquered that resistance is futile and order is beneficial. Sargon's successors expanded the empire further, but expansion stretched resources thin. Revolts erupted, distant provinces resisted, and the illusion of invincibility began to crack. Yet the empire endured for generations because its structure was strong. Centralized authority, standardized administration, and military deterrence held the system together longer than any previous political experiment. Babylon remained quiet during this time, neither a center of rebellion nor a focal point of power. Its insignificance protected it. Cities that mattered were targeted, punished, destroyed. But Babylon survived because it was not yet worth destroying. This pattern repeated itself throughout history, invisibility as survival. When the Akkadian Empire began to weaken under pressure from internal revolts, economic strain, and external invasions by the Gutians from the Zagros Mountains, the collapse was swift and brutal. Centralized control disintegrated. Governors declared independence, trade networks broke down, and once again Mesopotamia fractured. Into chaos, the Gutian period that followed was remembered by later generations as a dark age, a time of disorder when kingship lost legitimacy and gods withdrew favor. Whether this portrayal was exaggerated or not, the reality was instability, and instability creates opportunity. Babylon survived this chaos as it had survived others, adapting, absorbing, waiting. When order returned under the third dynasty of Ur, Babylon again became part of a larger system, administered through bureaucracy rather than ruled through fear. The Ur-free rulers rebuilt infrastructure, standardized laws, and attempted to restore centralized control through efficiency rather than conquest. Babylon learned once more, this time how states could function without constant warfare, how records could replace armies, how compliance could be enforced through systems rather than violence. But no system lasts forever, and when Ur fell, the lessons remained. Babylon had now experienced three different models of power: Sumerian city-state tradition, Akkadian imperial conquest, and Ur-3 bureaucratic centralization. This accumulation of political memory set Babylon apart from rivals who relied on only one form of authority. By the time Amorite leaders took control of Babylon, the city was no longer naive. It had seen empires rise and collapse. It understood that domination invites rebellion, rigidity invites destruction, and adaptability invites survival. The Akkadian Empire's greatest legacy was not its territory, but its example. It proved that empire was possible, but also that empire was fragile. Babylon internalized this lesson deeply, and when it eventually rose to power under Hammurabi, it would avoid some of the mistakes that destroyed its predecessors, preferring law over terror, legitimacy over brute force, and identity over mere expansion. During the Akkadian Age, Babylon remained in the background, but backgrounds shape foregrounds, and shadows teach patience. Babylon's time had not yet come, but it was no longer ignorant. It was becoming dangerous in a quieter way, because the most effective powers are those that learn from others' failures before making their own move. Shungwabam is traditionally remembered as the founder of Babylon's dynasty. Though little is known of his reign, his importance lies not in conquest, but in continuity. Because from this moment onward, Babylon had something it never had before: a ruling house invested in its future. His successors fortified the city, expanded irrigation, secured farmland, and defended trade routes. Not dramatic victories, but essential ones. Because cities are built by supply lines before armies. During this period, Babylon began transforming from a settlement into a city-state. Its walls grew, its temples gained prominence, and its administrative systems matured. Scribes recorded transactions in Akkadian using cuneiform inherited from Sumerian tradition. Blending old systems with new leadership, religion also shifted subtly but decisively. Babylon's local god Marduk began to rise in importance. Initially a minor deity, he was gradually elevated by Babylon's kings. His cult expanded, his myths rewritten to place him at the center of cosmic order. This was not accidental. It was strategy, because elevating Marduk elevated Babylon, tying divine authority directly to the city's political ambition. While older cities clung to ancient gods whose power was tied to fading prestige, Babylon reshaped belief to match its ascent. This alignment of religion and politics became one of its defining traits, and it distinguished Babylon from rivals who relied solely on military strength or inherited sanctity. The city also benefited from its geography in this new political landscape. Centrally located, connected by rivers and canals, Babylon became a hub for diplomacy, trade, and negotiation. Rulers from neighboring states interacted with it constantly. Alliances formed and dissolved. Marriages secured peace. Treaties recorded fragile agreements. And Babylon learned to navigate this volatile environment without exhausting itself in endless war. It was growing smarter, not just stronger. By the time Babylon entered the 18th century BCE, it was no longer an overlooked town, but a rising city-state with a clear identity, stable leadership, religious legitimacy, and administrative competence. Its rise had been slow, deliberate, and almost invisible. But that invisibility was its shield, because while other cities fought for dominance and destroyed one another, Babylon consolidated quietly, preparing for a moment when patience would be rewarded. That moment would come with the reign of Hammurabi. But Babylon's true birth had already occurred long before he wore the crown. It was born in the shadows, shaped by centuries of observation, survival, and adaptation, proving that the most dangerous cities are not those that rise fastest, but those that learn how to wait. When Babylon was still learning how to exist, another force had already learned how to dominate. The Akkadian Empire did not rise slowly or quietly. It arrived through conquest, ambition, and a man who believed the world could be unified under one rule. Sargon of Akkad, a figure surrounded by legend, seized power around the 23rd century before the Common Era, and did something no one had ever done before. He conquered city after city and bound them into a single political system, turning Mesopotamia from a patchwork of independent city-states into an empire. This was a transformation so profound that even Babylon, still small and unremarkable, would be shaped by its consequences. The Akkadian Empire was built on military strength, but it survived through administration. Sargon understood that conquest without control collapses quickly, so he adopted Sumerian systems of writing, taxation, and religious legitimacy. Akkadian rulers presented themselves as chosen by the gods, protectors of order, and masters of chaos. The language of power shifted. Akkadian replaced Sumerian as the dominant spoken tongue of administration. Yet Sumerian remained sacred and scholarly, creating a dual culture that would later define Babylon itself. Babylon existed within this empire as a minor settlement, administered rather than celebrated, governed rather than feared. But this position offered something more valuable than glory. It offered observation. Babylon watched how the Akkadians ruled, how armies moved, how governors enforced authority, how rebellion was punished, and how loyalty was manufactured through propaganda and religion. It learned that empires rely not only on violence, but on narrative, on convincing the conquered that resistance is futile and order is beneficial. Sargon's successors expanded the empire further, but expansion stretched resources thin. Revolts erupted, distant provinces resisted, and the illusion of invincibility began to crack. Yet the empire endured for generations because its structure was strong. Centralized authority, standardized administration, and military deterrence held the system together longer than any previous political experiment. Babylon remained quiet during this time, neither a center of rebellion nor a focal point of power. Its insignificance protected it. Cities that mattered were targeted, punished, destroyed. But Babylon survived because it was not yet worth destroying. This pattern repeated itself throughout history, invisibility as survival. When the Akkadian Empire began to weaken under pressure from internal revolts, economic strain, and external invasions by the Gutians from the Zagros Mountains, the collapse was swift and brutal. Centralized control disintegrated. Governors declared independence. Trade networks broke down. And once again Mesopotamia fractured. Into chaos, the Gutian period that followed was remembered by later generations as a dark age. A time of disorder when kingship lost legitimacy and gods withdrew favor. Whether this portrayal was exaggerated or not, the reality was instability, and instability creates opportunity. Babylon survived this chaos as it had survived others, adapting, absorbing, waiting. When order returned under the third dynasty of Ur, Babylon again became part of a larger system, administered through bureaucracy rather than ruled through fear. The Ur-free rulers rebuilt infrastructure, standardized laws, and attempted to restore centralized control through efficiency rather than conquest. Babylon learned once more, this time how states could function without constant warfare, how records could replace armies, how compliance could be enforced through systems rather than violence. But no system lasts forever, and when Ur fell, the lessons remained. Babylon had now experienced three different models of power: Sumerian city-state tradition, Akkadian imperial conquest, and Ur-3 bureaucratic centralization. This accumulation of political memory set Babylon apart from rivals who relied on only one form of authority. By the time Amorite leaders took control of Babylon, the city was no longer naive. It had seen empires rise and collapse. It understood that domination invites rebellion, rigidity invites destruction, and adaptability invites survival. The Akkadian Empire's greatest legacy was not its territory, but its example. It proved that empire was possible, but also that empire was fragile. Babylon internalized this lesson deeply, and when it eventually rose to power under Hammurabi, it would avoid some of the mistakes that destroyed its predecessors, preferring law over terror, legitimacy over brute force, and identity over mere expansion. During the Akkadian Age, Babylon remained in the background, but backgrounds shape foregrounds, and shadows teach patience. Babylon's time had not yet come, but it was no longer ignorant. It was becoming dangerous in a quieter way, because the most effective powers are those that learn from others' failures before making their own move. Empires rarely fall in a single moment. They fracture, weaken, and dissolve long before the final blow is struck. And after the Akkadian system collapsed, and the third dynasty of Ur briefly restored order, Mesopotamia once again entered a familiar phase: fragmentation, uncertainty, and opportunity. The fall of Ur around the beginning of the second millennium before the Common Era did not come from one enemy alone. It came from pressure on all sides: Elamite armies from the east, Amorite movements from the west, internal strain caused by rigid bureaucracy and economic imbalance, and the simple exhaustion of maintaining centralized control over a difficult landscape. When Ur fell, its records stopped, its authority vanished, and the illusion of permanent order dissolved. The land between the rivers returned to a state where no single power could command loyalty. And in that vacuum, dozens of city-states reasserted themselves, each ruled by local dynasties, each competing for land, water, labor, and legitimacy. This was not chaos in the sense of anarchy. It was competition without restraint. Alliances formed and collapsed rapidly. Treaties were signed and broken. Marriages were arranged for political advantage, and warfare became frequent but calculated. Because no city could afford total destruction, survival depended on balance rather than dominance. Babylon existed within this fractured world as a rising city-state, no longer insignificant, but not yet dominant. Its Amorite rulers understood that reckless expansion would invite coalitions against them. So Babylon moved carefully, consolidating territories slowly, securing farmland, strengthening canals, and protecting trade routes. While other cities rushed to fill the power vacuum through force, Babylon chose endurance. Because endurance outlasts ambition. The political map of Mesopotamia during this period was crowded and unstable. Larsa in the south emerged as a major rival, controlling fertile lands and commanding wealth through agriculture and temple economies. Eshnunna to the northeast dominated trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau. Mari along the Euphrates controlled communication between Mesopotamia and Syria. Ashur in the north was growing quietly, laying the foundations of what would later become Assyria, and Elam remained a constant threat from the east, intervening when it suited its interests. This environment forced Babylon to become diplomatically skilled. Its kings learned when to fight and when to wait, when to ally and when to betray. Power was no longer measured only by soldiers, but by timing. A city that attacked too early would be crushed. A city that waited too long would be swallowed. Babylon survived because it learned how to read the moment. During this period, Amorite rulers across Mesopotamia reshaped kingship itself. Unlike earlier Sumerian rulers who emphasized divine stewardship, Amorite kings presented themselves as protectors. warriors, and judges, blending older traditions with new leadership styles. They ruled cities that were culturally Sumerian and Akkadian, but politically Amorite, creating hybrid states that were flexible and adaptive. Babylon fit perfectly into this new order. Its rulers were outsiders who had become insiders, capable of navigating multiple traditions without being bound to any single one. This adaptability became crucial as conflicts intensified. Droughts and resource shortages added pressure. Canals required constant maintenance, and cities that failed to manage water systems declined rapidly. Babylon invested heavily in infrastructure, understanding that control of water meant control of survival. Canals were repaired, extended, and guarded, agricultural output stabilized, and population growth followed. These practical decisions mattered more than battlefield victories, because armies cannot march without food. As Babylon strengthened internally, it remained cautious externally, avoiding direct confrontation with powerful neighbors like Larsa until conditions shifted. Patience defined this era, but patience was not weakness, it was preparation. Babylon's rulers observed how rivals overextended themselves, how Larsa's dominance created resentment, how Eshnana's control of trade provoked opposition, how Murray's strategic position made it both powerful and vulnerable. Babylon waited for imbalance, because imbalance is the true enemy of empires. During this time, the religious identity of Babylon continued to evolve. Marduk's cult expanded. His myths were revised to elevate him above other gods, and religious festivals reinforced the idea that Babylon was divinely favored. This was subtle propaganda, not imposed through terror, but through tradition. Belief spread more quietly than conquest, but it endured longer. Scribes played a critical role in this process, recording laws, treaties, economic transactions, and religious texts, creating continuity in a fragmented world. Writing became Babylon's weapon, preserving authority when armies were uncertain. The city's administration grew more complex, bureaucracy expanded, and governance became increasingly centralized within the city, even as the surrounding world remained unstable. By the time Babylon entered the early 18th century before the Common Era, it was no longer merely surviving the vacuum of power. It was shaping it. The collapse of old empires had cleared the field, but only those cities that could manage uncertainty would rise. Babylon had learned from every collapse before it that domination invites resistance, rigidity invites failure, and adaptability invites longevity. The vacuum left by fallen empires did not guarantee Babylon's rise, but it gave Babylon space. And space allowed strategy. The stage was set. The rivals were known, the alliances fragile, and the balance of power ready to shift. All that remained was a ruler capable of exploiting this moment. A king who understood that the greatest victories are not won through speed or force, but through patience, timing, and control. That king would be Hammurabi, but his rise would only be possible because Babylon had already survived the most dangerous phase of history, the moment when power disappears and everyone fights to replace it. History often remembers conquerors as warriors who rive with fire and steel. But some of the most enduring takeovers happened quietly through settlement, adaptation, and patience, and the Amorites were masters of this silent conquest. Long before they ruled Babylon, they were seen as outsiders, semi-nomadic tribes from the western deserts and highlands of Syria, moving slowly eastward over generations, drawn by fertile land and opportunity. Early Mesopotamian texts describe them with suspicion, portraying them as uncivilized, unpredictable, and dangerous. Yet these same texts reveal something else. The Amorites did not destroy cities when they arrived. They entered them, settled among their people, learned their languages, married into their families, and adopted their gods. This ability to blend rather than replace would prove decisive. As centralized empires collapsed and local dynasties struggled to maintain control, Amorite leaders stepped into power vacuums, not as invaders, but as alternatives, men who promised protection, stability, and continuity in a fractured world. Across Mesopotamia, Amorite dynasties rose in city after city. Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, Ashur, and Babylon itself, transforming the political landscape without erasing its cultural foundations. Babylon's transformation under Amorite rule marked a turning point in its identity, because for the first time the city was governed by rulers whose legitimacy did not rest on ancient prestige or divine inheritance alone, but on their ability to maintain order and prosperity. The founder of Babylon's Amorite dynasty, Sumu-Abum, did not conquer vast territories or leave behind monumental inscriptions. Yet his reign mattered because it established continuity, a stable ruling house with long-term ambitions. From this moment, Babylon was no longer merely a place administered by others. It became a city with a future planned by its own kings. Sumu-Abum and his immediate successors focused on survival rather than dominance, fortifying the city, securing farmland, maintaining canals, and defending trade routes. These actions may appear modest compared to later conquests, but they were essential, because cities collapse from neglect before they fall to armies. While rival states pursued aggressive expansion, Babylon invested in internal strength, creating a foundation that would later support empire. The Amorite kings who followed, Sumu-La-El, Sabium, Apil-Sin, and Sin-Muballit, inherited a city that grew incrementally stronger with each generation. Their reigns were marked not by dramatic victories, but by consolidation, slow territorial expansion, and administrative refinement. Land was absorbed gradually, towns brought under Babylonian authority through treaties or limited warfare, and governance standardized across the growing state. This slow pace was deliberate. Aggressive expansion would have provoked coalitions among stronger neighbors, but measured growth allowed Babylon to avoid becoming a target. Amorite leadership also reshaped kingship itself, blending older Sumerian traditions of divine stewardship with a more personal, warrior king image. Babylonian rulers presented themselves as judges, protectors, and builders, emphasizing justice, order, and care for their people. This image was reinforced through temple building and religious patronage, particularly the elevation of Marduk, Babylon's city god, whose rise mirrored the city's political ascent Under Amorite rule, Marduk was no longer a minor local deity. His cult expanded, his myths revised, and his authority elevated above older gods associated with rival cities. This was not mere religious devotion, it was political strategy. By aligning Babylon's fate with a supreme deity, its rulers created a divine justification for expansion and authority. Belief became a tool of governance, binding diverse populations under a shared spiritual identity. Administration under the Amorites grew increasingly sophisticated. Scribes recorded laws, contracts, taxes, and correspondence using cuneiform. Akkadian became the dominant administrative language, while Sumerian remained sacred and scholarly, creating continuity with the past while allowing adaptation. Babylon's bureaucracy expanded to manage agriculture, labor, and trade, ensuring resources flowed efficiently and predictably. Water management remained central. Canals were lifelines, and their maintenance was treated as a royal responsibility. Kings who failed to protect irrigation risked famine, rebellion, and divine disfavor. Babylon's rulers understood this deeply, investing heavily in infrastructure that stabilized food production and supported population growth. Diplomacy became as important as warfare during this period. Amorite kings navigated a landscape filled with rivals. Alliances were forged through marriages and treaties, broken when advantageous, and renewed when necessary. Babylon learned to survive by flexibility rather than rigid loyalty, understanding that in a fragmented world, permanence was an illusion. Power shifted constantly, and survival depended on adaptation. This political skill would later define Hammurabi's success, but it was cultivated over generations, not invented overnight. The Amorite takeover of Babylon was not a sudden event, but a process, a gradual transformation from provincial town to regional power, guided by rulers who understood that legitimacy mattered more than terror, identity mattered more than ancestry, and patience mattered more than speed. By the early 18th century, before the Common Era, Babylon had become a stable and respected city-state, no longer overlooked, no longer vulnerable, but not yet dominant. It had outlasted older powers through quiet strength and careful planning. Its Amorite rulers had proven that outsiders could become builders rather than destroyers, reshaping Mesopotamian politics without erasing its cultural memory. The stage was now set for Babylon's greatest transformation, the rise of a king who would turn patience into power and survival into empire. Hammurabi did not inherit chaos. He inherited a city prepared for greatness, forged by generations of outsiders who had learned how to rule without announcing their rival. Dynasties are not born from conquest alone. They are born from continuity, memory, and the quiet ability to hold power without collapsing under it. And Babylon's first dynasty emerged not with thunder, but with endurance. After generations of Amorite settlement and gradual consolidation, Babylon finally stood as a city ruled by its own kings. Not governors, not outsiders serving distant powers, but rulers invested in the city's survival and future. Sumu-Abum is remembered as the founder of this first dynasty, a man whose reign left few dramatic records, but whose importance lies in what he stabilized. Babylon under Sumu-Abum was still modest compared to its rivals, but it was independent. And independence changes everything, because once a city governs itself, every decision becomes a statement of identity. Sumu Abum's rule marked the transition from survival to intention. Babylon was no longer reacting to chaos. It was shaping its own course. His successors inherited this foundation and expanded it carefully. Sumu-la-El strengthened defenses and extended Babylon's control over nearby territories, securing farmland and water access. Sabium followed by continuing this slow expansion, ensuring that each gain could be administered and defended rather than simply conquered. These early kings understood a truth that many later rulers would forget. A city grows stronger not by how much land it claims, but by how well it governs what it already holds. Administration became central to Babylonian rule. Scribes were empowered, records meticulously kept, taxes standardized, labor organized, and legal practices formalized. The state became predictable, and predictability breeds loyalty. Babylon's population grew not because of forced relocation, but because stability attracts people. Farmers settled where irrigation was reliable. Merchants traded where contracts were enforced. Craftsmen worked where temples and palaces commissioned projects. The city became a magnet for opportunity. Religion played a crucial role in reinforcing this stability. Babylon's rulers continued elevating Marduk, transforming him from a local god into a symbol of universal order. Myths were rewritten to place him at the center of creation, portraying Babylon as the chosen city where cosmic balance was maintained. This was not abstract theology, it was political messaging, tying obedience to divine order and rebellion to chaos. Belief became governance by another name. Temple construction reinforced this ideology physically. Temples were rebuilt, expanded, and endowed with resources, making them centers of economic as well as spiritual life. Priests worked alongside administrators, blurring the line between sacred and secular authority. This fusion created a resilient system where political legitimacy was reinforced daily through ritual and tradition. Militarily, the first dynasty avoided reckless warfare. Babylon fought when necessary, but preferred diplomacy. Treaties secured borders. Marriages forged alliances, and conflicts were often limited rather than total. This restraint was strategic. Babylon was surrounded by powerful rivals, and survival required avoiding isolation. The kings of the first dynasty understood the balance of power and acted accordingly, waiting for opportunities rather than forcing outcomes. Economic management remained a priority. Canals were repaired and extended, ensuring stable agriculture even in difficult seasons. Land was distributed under controlled conditions, preventing extreme inequality that could fuel unrest. Debt regulations began to emerge, reflecting an early concern for social stability. These measures did not eliminate hardship, but they reduced chaos. And in a world accustomed to instability, reduced chaos was a powerful advantage. Communication expanded alongside administration. Messengers carried orders and reports across Babylonian territory, ensuring that the king's authority was felt even in distant towns. This network of information allowed faster responses to threats and opportunities, making Babylon more agile than rivals burdened by slower systems. Over time, Babylon's reputation shifted. It was no longer seen as merely another Amorite city-state, but as a disciplined, orderly, and reliable power. Neighboring rulers took it seriously. Alliances with Babylon became desirable, and opposition more cautious. This reputation was not built on fear, but on consistency. A city that kept its promises, enforced its laws, and protected its people. Consistency is rare in history, and Babylon cultivated it deliberately. By the time Sin-Muballit ascended the throne in the early 18th century before the Common Era, Babylon was firmly established as a regional power, its borders secure, its administration mature, its religious identity strong. Sin-Muballit continued the policies of his predecessors, reinforcing infrastructure, defending territory, and preparing for future expansion. His reign is often overshadowed by his son's achievements. But without his steady governance, the empire to come would have lacked foundation. Sin-Mubalitt's most significant act was not a conquest, but a succession. He raised a son in a state that was stable rather than desperate, a city confident rather than fragile. When Hammurabi inherited the throne, he did not inherit chaos. He inherited a system, laws already practiced, administration already functioning, belief already unified, and rivals already identified. The first dynasty of Babylon had achieved something rare. It transformed a city from a survivor into a ruler without destroying its identity. This transformation was not dramatic, but it was decisive, because when the moment arrived for Babylon to seize dominance, it would do so not as a reckless conqueror, but as a prepared power, shaped by generations of patience, discipline, and memory. The city had learned how to rule long before it attempted to rule others. Great rulers are often remembered for the moment they seize power, but the most dangerous phase of leadership is the period before ambition reveals itself, and Hammurabi's early reign was defined not by conquest, but by restraint. When he ascended the throne around the beginning of the 18th century before the Common Era, Babylon was strong but not dominant, surrounded by rivals who were older, richer, and in some cases militarily superior. To the south, Larsa controlled fertile lands and temple wealth. To the northeast, Eshnunna dominated trade routes. To the northwest, Mari commanded communication along the Euphrates, and beyond them Elam and Ashur waited for opportunity. Hammurabi inherited a city that was stable but vulnerable, a system built by generations of careful rulers. And his first challenge was not to expand it, but to protect it from premature destruction. Many kings would have rushed to war to prove strength. Hammurabi did the opposite. He waited, because he understood that impatience invites coalitions, and coalitions destroy rising powers. His early years focused on internal consolidation, strengthening city walls, repairing canals, securing grain supplies, and reinforcing administration. These were not glamorous actions, but they created resilience. Because a city that can endure siege and famine is far harder to defeat than one that merely commands armies, Hammurabi also invested heavily in legitimacy, presenting himself as a just ruler favored by Marduk, issuing proclamations that emphasized protection of the weak, restoration of order, and devotion to the gods. This was not propaganda without substance. It was preparation. because kings who claim moral authority must eventually demonstrate it. During this period, Hammurabi avoided major military confrontations. Instead, he engaged in diplomacy, forging temporary alliances, exchanging envoys, and observing rival courts closely. Treaties were signed not as permanent commitments, but as tools, flexible agreements designed to buy time. While rivals exhausted themselves in conflicts with one another, Hammurabi studied their patterns, learning which kings were impulsive, which cities overextended their resources, and which alliances were fragile. Intelligence became his primary weapon. Letters preserved from this period reveal a ruler deeply involved in administration and strategy, issuing detailed instructions to governors, monitoring local disputes, and responding quickly to emerging threats. This level of attention prevented internal dissent and ensured loyalty. Because subjects are less likely to rebel against a ruler who listens. Hammurabi's patience was also shaped by memory. Babylon had survived because earlier rulers avoided reckless ambition, and Hammurabi respected that inheritance. He did not see conquest as destiny, but as timing, waiting for moments when war would be decisive rather than draining. While Lars's king Rim-Sin ruled for decades and appeared unassailable, Hammurabi did not challenge him directly. Instead, he strengthened Babylon's position quietly, securing border towns, consolidating influence through treaties, and ensuring that when conflict came, Babylon would not stand alone. This approach frustrated rivals who underestimated him, mistaking caution for weakness. But caution was his shield. Hammurabi also recognized the importance of law as a tool of governance even before his famous code was inscribed, legal practices were standardized, judges appointed, and disputes resolved through royal authority, reinforcing the idea that Babylon was a place where order prevailed. This reputation attracted merchants, artisans, and settlers, further strengthening the city economically. And economic strength underpins military power. Hammurabi's early reign coincided with shifting conditions across Mesopotamia. Alliances shifted, Elam intervened unpredictably. Droughts and resource shortages strained rival states, and cities that had grown complacent began to weaken. Hammurabi did not cause these changes, but he was ready to exploit them when Eshnunna faced pressure from Elam. Babylon positioned itself advantageously, offering support selectively while avoiding full commitment. When Murray's alliances shifted, Hammurabi adjusted his stance, maintaining communication and influence without exposing Babylon to unnecessary risk. This constant adjustment required discipline and foresight, qualities Hammurabi possessed in abundance. His patience was not passive. It was active observation, constant preparation, and strategic delay. He understood that the first city to strike often bears the greatest cost, while the last to strike often claims the greatest reward. By the time Hammurabi was ready to move militarily, the political landscape had changed in his favor. Rivals were weakened, alliances frayed, and Babylon's strength quietly surpassed expectations. Hammurabi's early reign reveals a fundamental truth about his success. He did not build his empire through brilliance alone, but through discipline, restraint, and respect for timing. He waited while others rushed. He prepared while others boasted. and he listened while others commanded. This phase of patience laid the foundation for his later conquests, because when Hammurabi finally chose war, it would not be a gamble, it would be a calculation. And in a world shaped by unpredictable rivers and fragile alliances, calculation was the deadliest weapon of all. When Hammurabi finally chose to abandon patience and embrace war, the world he faced was already exhausted. Alliances were fragile, rival kings were distracted, and the balance of power had shifted so subtly that few noticed Babylon was now the strongest force in the region. Hammurabi did not announce his intentions with grand declarations. He moved quietly, selecting targets not for glory, but for strategic value. His first campaigns focused on securing Babylon's immediate surroundings, eliminating threats that could disrupt supply lines or invite invasion. These early victories were swift and controlled, designed to demonstrate strength without provoking panic among stronger neighbors. Once Babylon's borders were secure, Hammurabi turned his attention to larger rivals. The most significant of these was Larsa in the south, ruled by Rin-Sin, a king who had dominated southern Mesopotamia for decades and controlled its richest agricultural lands. Hammurabi understood that defeating Larsa would not only provide resources, but also legitimacy, because whoever controlled the south controlled the economic heart of Mesopotamia. Yet he did not rush. Instead, he waited for the moment when Rin-Sin was isolated, alliances weakened, and Elamite pressure strained Larsa's defenses. When the time came, Hammurabi struck decisively. Babylonian forces advanced with precision, targeting key cities, cutting off water supplies, and isolating Larsa's allies. The campaign culminated in the fall of Larsa, round the middle of the 18th century. Before the Common Era, Rin-Sin was captured, and Babylon absorbed the southern cities, Uruk, and other ancient centers that had once defined civilization. This victory transformed Babylon overnight. It now controlled vast agricultural wealth, temple economies, and religious prestige. But Hammurabi did not stop to celebrate. Because conquest creates new enemies, and consolidation matters more than triumph, he immediately moved to stabilize the south, appointing loyal governors, confirming local privileges, and integrating administrative systems rather than dismantling them. This approach minimized resistance and ensured steady resource flow. With the south secured, Hammurabi turned northward, where former allies now stood vulnerable. Eshnunna had been weakened by conflict with Elam and internal strife, and Hammurabi exploited this weakness without hesitation. Babylonian forces moved quickly, defeating Eshnunna and absorbing its territories, gaining control of vital trade routes that connected Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau. This victory further isolated Mari, the city that controlled the Euphrates corridor and had once been a critical ally. Hammurabi's relationship with Mari was complex, bound by treaties and mutual interests. But Hammurabi understood that no independent power could remain between Babylon and the Western lands. When Mari's king Zimri-Lim became a liability rather than an asset, Hammurabi acted ruthlessly. Babylonian forces marched against Mari. The city fell, its palace burned, and its archives buried beneath ash. Whether Hammurabi intended permanent destruction or strategic punishment remains debated. But the result was clear. Mari never recovered as a major power. With Mari gone, Babylon controlled the Euphrates corridor, extending its influence towards Syria and the Levant. These campaigns were not random acts of aggression. They followed a clear pattern: isolate, strike, absorb, stabilize. Hammurabi avoided creating empty ruins that required constant military presence. Instead, he transformed conquered cities into functioning parts of his state, preserving local traditions while enforcing Babylonian authority. Administration expanded rapidly to manage this vast territory. Messengers carried orders across hundreds of kilometers. Governors reported regularly, and scribes recorded every transaction. Conquest was followed immediately by governance, ensuring that Babylon's gains were sustainable. Hammurabi also understood the psychological dimension of power. He portrayed his wars as acts of justice, restoring order where chaos reigned. Inscriptions and proclamations emphasized divine sanction, presenting victories as fulfillment of Marduk's will. This narrative reduced resistance and reinforced loyalty. Because people are more willing to submit to a ruler who claims moral authority rather than raw domination. By the end of these campaigns, Babylon had become the dominant power in Mesopotamia, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the upper Euphrates, uniting regions that had not been under single control since the Akkadian Empire. Yet Hammurabi avoided repeating Akkad's mistakes. He did not rely solely on military force, nor did he impose uniformity blindly. Diversity was managed rather than erased, allowing Babylon to govern a mosaic of cultures without constant rebellion. Hammurabi's conquests reshaped Mesopotamia politically, economically, and psychologically. Cities that had once competed now answered to Babylon. Trade routes flowed through its administration, and religious authorities centered increasingly on Marduk. The city had become the axis of the region, but empire brings new challenges. Maintaining order across vast distances strains resources and exposes weaknesses. Hammurabi was aware of this, and his response would define his legacy more than his victories, because conquering land is temporary, but building systems that endure is permanent. And Hammurabi was not finished. The empire he had forged required law, structure, and ideology to survive beyond his lifetime. And it was this need that would give rise to his most enduring achievement, a code not just of laws, but of control, justice, and identity, one that would define Babylon long after its armies had vanished. Conquest can silence enemies, but it cannot organize a world. And Hammurabi understood that an empire without law collapses the moment fear fades. After uniting Mesopotamia through war, he faced a greater challenge: how to rule people who spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and remembered different histories. Armies could hold cities, but only systems could hold loyalty. And so Hammurabi turned to law, not as a moral ideal, but as a tool of control. The code that bears his name did not emerge suddenly or in isolation. It was the culmination of centuries of legal tradition inherited from Sumerian and Akkadian rulers. But Hammurabi transformed these scattered practices into a single authoritative statement, carved into stone and placed in public view, not because everyone could read it, but because everyone could see it. The stele itself was a symbol of permanence, towering, immovable, and unchallengeable. At its top, Hammurabi is depicted standing before Shamash, the god of justice, receiving the laws directly from the divine source. This image mattered as much as the words below it, because it declared that the king was not inventing rules arbitrarily. He was enforcing cosmic order. Law was no longer negotiable custom. It was divine mandate. The code contained nearly 300 laws covering every aspect of life: property, disputes, trade, wages, agriculture, marriage, inheritance, assault, theft, and professional responsibility. But its purpose was not equality, it was predictability. Punishments were harsh and often unequal, varying according to social class. A noble, a commoner, and a slave did not receive the same treatment for the same offense. But everyone knew what to expect, and in an unstable world, predictability was power. The famous principle of retaliation, often summarized as an eye for an eye, was not about vengeance. It was about limitation. It set boundaries on punishment, preventing endless cycles of revenge, while reinforcing hierarchy. The code protected property fiercely because property was the foundation of economic stability. It regulated interest rates, debt, and contracts, ensuring that commerce could function across the empire. Farmers were protected from disaster under certain conditions, recognizing that floods and droughts were acts of the gods rather than crimes. Professionals were held accountable for failure. Builders whose houses collapsed faced severe consequences. Doctors whose treatments caused death were punished. These laws reinforced competence. Fear ensured diligence. The code also reveals the social values Hammurabi sought to promote. Family stability was emphasized. Patriarchal authority reinforced. Adultery punished severely. Inheritance regulated carefully, because households were economic units as much as social ones. Slavery was normalized but regulated. Slaves were property, yet their treatment was defined, limiting abuse in certain contexts. This was not humanitarian reform, it was administrative order. The code's prologue and epilogue framed Hammurabi as a shepherd king, chosen by the gods to protect the weak from the strong. This rhetoric mattered deeply because it positioned obedience as moral duty rather than submission. People were not obeying Hammurabi, they were obeying justice itself, as defined by divine order. The public display of the code reinforced this message. It stood as a constant reminder that authority was structured, not arbitrary, and that rebellion was not merely political disobedience, but disruption of cosmic balance. Enforcement of the law relied on local judges and officials, but ultimate authority rested with the king. Hammurabi remained the final arbiter, reinforcing central control while delegating daily administration. This balance allowed the empire to function across vast distances. Without constant military intervention, law reduced the need for force, because fear of punishment replaced fear of soldiers. The code also served a political purpose beyond governance. It unified diverse populations under a shared legal framework. Cities that had once followed their own customs now answered to Babylonian law, integrating them psychologically into the empire. Even after Hammurabi's death, the code endured, copied by scribes, studied by officials, and referenced by later rulers. Its influence spread far beyond Babylon, shaping legal thought across the ancient Near East. Though often misunderstood in modern times as a primitive justice system, the code was in fact a sophisticated mechanism for maintaining imperial stability. Hammurabi did not create justice, he created order. And order was the most valuable currency in a world defined by chaos. By carving law into stone, Hammurabi attempted to carve permanence into history, to make his empire last longer than the memory of his armies. Whether he succeeded fully is debatable, but the ambition itself reveals the core of Babylonian power. Not violence alone, but structure. Not conquest alone, but continuity. The code stands as a reminder that the most enduring empires are not those that win the most battles, but those that impose systems capable of surviving their creators. Hammurabi's laws did not make Babylon eternal, but they ensured that Babylon's influence would outlive its fall. Because ideas carved into stone travel further and last longer than swords ever could. Empires are often judged by their wars and kings, but they are sustained by ordinary lives lived under extraordinary systems. And Babylon at its height was not only a center of power, but a living organism, filled with farmers, craftsmen, scribes, merchants, priests, soldiers, women, children, and slaves, all bound together by law, belief, and necessity. The city itself was dense and crowded. Narrow streets wound between mud brick houses stacked close together. Rooftops served as workspaces, storage areas, and sleeping platforms during hot nights. Life inside Babylon followed rhythms dictated by rivers, seasons, and ritual. Agriculture remained the foundation of the economy. Fields outside the city walls produced barley, dates, sesame, and vegetables, all dependent on carefully maintained irrigation. Canals. Water was life, and whoever controlled canals controlled survival. Farmers owed taxes in grain, labor, or silver, recorded meticulously by scribes whose tablets tracked every obligation and every delivery. These records created accountability, but also dependency, because debt followed poor harvests, and debt could turn free citizens into bonded laborers. Merchants moved through Babylon constantly, trading textiles, metals, timber, and luxury goods from distant regions. Caravans arrived from Anatolia, Syria, Elam, and the Persian Gulf, bringing copper, tin, lapis lazuli, incense, and precious stones. Babylon's central position made it a hub of exchange. Markets buzzed with activity. Prices fluctuated according to supply, floods, wars, and royal decrees. And contracts governed every transaction. Trust was not assumed, it was written, sealed, and witnessed. Scribes occupied a privileged position in this world. Trained in reading and writing cuneiform, they preserved knowledge and enforced administration. Literacy was power, and those who could write controlled memory law and economy. Temples were not merely places of worship, they were major economic institutions. Owning land, employing workers, lending grain and silver, and redistributing resources. During shortages, priests managed vast estates and coordinated rituals that reinforced social order. Religion permeated daily life. Omens were read in dreams, whether animal behavior and the movement of stars. People consulted diviners before making important decisions, believing the gods constantly communicated their will. Family life followed strict hierarchies. Households were patriarchal. Fathers held authority over wives, children, and dependents. Marriages were arranged with contracts specifying dowries, inheritance, rights, and obligations. Women's lives varied widely according to status. Elite women could own property, manage estates, and participate in religious roles, while poorer women labored in households, fields, or workshops. Childbirth was dangerous and mortality high. Rituals surrounded pregnancy and birth, seeking divine protection. Children learned trades from parents or were apprenticed. Education beyond basic skills was rare and reserved for scribal families. Slavery was an accepted and regulated part of Babylonian society. Slaves came from war, debt, or birth. They were considered property, but not without legal recognition. Laws governed their treatment, punishment, and potential manumission. Some slaves worked in households, others in temples or workshops. Skilled slaves could earn money and even buy freedom. Yet freedom was always fragile. Social mobility existed, but was limited. Status shaped justice, opportunity, and survival. Crime and punishment were visible reminders of order. Penalties were harsh and public, reinforcing deterrence. Yet the presence of law created a sense of stability. Disputes were settled in courts rather than through blood feuds. Judges evaluated testimony, witnesses, and contracts. Appeals could reach royal authority, reinforcing the king's role as ultimate guarantor of justice. Daily life was also shaped by festivals and rituals. The Akitu festival marked the new year, renewing cosmic order and reaffirming Babylon's central role. During these ceremonies, the king's authority was symbolically tested and restored, reminding everyone that power was conditional on divine favor. Entertainment and leisure existed in modest forms. Music, storytelling, and communal gatherings provided relief from labor. Myths and epics were recited aloud, preserving cultural memory. In a largely illiterate society, the Epic of Gilgamesh circulated in Babylonian versions, reflecting shared anxieties about mortality, friendship, and legacy, reminding listeners that even kings could not escape death. Beneath the surface of order, tension always existed. Inequality, resentment, and fear shaped interactions. Law controlled behavior but did not erase hardship. Famine, disease, and war could disrupt lives suddenly. Yet Babylon endured because its systems absorbed shocks rather than collapsing under them. People adapted to uncertainty through tradition, law, and belief. The city's strength lay not in the comfort of its citizens, but in their predictability. Everyone knew their place, their obligations, and their risks. This predictability created resilience. Babylon was not a utopia. It was a machine designed to function under pressure, grinding lives into stability. And while many suffered within it, the system itself survived. Because it balanced coercion with opportunity, fear with order, and belief with administration. Life inside Babylon reveals the true nature of empire, not glory, but management. Not freedom, but structure. And it was this structure that allowed Babylon to endure conquests, disasters, and decline long after kings fell and armies vanished. The habits of life shaped within its walls would echo through history, influencing how societies organized themselves for centuries to come. In Babylon, religion was not separate from life or power. It was the invisible structure holding everything together, shaping how people understood the world, their place in it, and the forces that governed their fate. The Babylonians believed the universe was fragile, constantly threatened by chaos and disorder, and only through proper ritual obedience and balance could stability be maintained. The gods were not distant, benevolent beings. They were powerful, unpredictable, and deeply involved in human affairs. Every flood, drought, disease, victory, or defeat was interpreted as divine communication, and understanding these messages became essential for survival. The pantheon was vast, inherited from Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, yet reorganized under Babylonian ideology. At its center stood Marduk, supreme god and embodiment of cosmic order. Beneath him were gods who governed specific aspects of existence. Shamash oversaw justice and truth. Sin ruled the moon and time. Ishtar embodied love, fertility, and war. Nergal brought plague and destruction. He represented wisdom and hidden knowledge. These gods were not abstract concepts. They were active forces whose moods had to be constantly managed. Temples dominated the city's skyline. Massive structures built of mud brick rising above houses and markets. The most iconic of these was ziggurats, stepped towers that symbolized the connection between earth and heaven. The ziggurat was not a place of public worship, but a cosmic marker, its summit believed to be a dwelling place for the god, a bridge between worlds. The largest of these in Babylon was Etemenenki, later associated with legends of a tower reaching the sky. Its presence declared Babylon as the center of the universe in Babylonian thought. Rituals governed daily life. Offerings of food, drink, incense, and animals were made to appease the gods. Priests performed complex ceremonies to maintain divine favor. Neglecting ritual was dangerous because divine anger could manifest as disaster. Festivals punctuated the calendar, reinforcing cosmic cycles and social cohesion. The Akitu festival was the most important, lasting days and involving processions, sacrifices, and symbolic acts that reenacted creation itself. During this festival, Marduk's victory over chaos was reaffirmed and the king's authority ritually tested and restored. This public submission of the king to divine judgment reinforced a powerful message that even rulers were subject to cosmic law. Divination was central to Babylonian religion. The future was believed to be readable if one knew how to interpret signs. Priests examined animal entrails, observed the movement of stars, recorded eclipses, and studied omens in dreams. Vast libraries of omen texts guided interpretation, allowing priests to advise kings on war, diplomacy, and construction. Astronomy and astrology emerged from this religious need. Babylonian priests mapped the heavens, not out of scientific curiosity, but because the sky was a text written by the gods. Understanding it meant anticipating divine intent. Magic and medicine were intertwined with religion. Illness was often seen as the result of divine displeasure, or malevolent spirits. Healing rituals combined herbs, incantations, and prayers. Priests and healers worked together to restore balance. Fear of demons and curses shaped behavior. Protective amulets and spells were common. Religion provided explanation in a world without scientific certainty, and explanation brought comfort even when it did not bring control. Morality was framed in religious terms. Justice was not merely social order, but divine alignment. Breaking the law offended the gods and threatened cosmic balance. This belief reinforced obedience more effectively than force alone. Because punishment was not only legal, but spiritual, the dead were not celebrated. Babylonian views of the afterlife were bleak, a shadowy existence beneath the earth where souls lived without reward. This reinforced focus on life and legacy. Achievements in the living world mattered more than hope of paradise. Temples also functioned as centers of knowledge and economy. They stored texts, trained scribes, managed land, and redistributed resources. Priests held immense influence, shaping policy and advising rulers. This concentration of religious and administrative power created stability, but also rigidity. Challenging religious authority meant challenging the foundations of society itself. Babylon's religious system was inclusive, yet hierarchical. Foreign gods were often absorbed rather than rejected. Their powers assigned roles under Marduk's supremacy. This flexibility allowed Babylon to integrate conquered peoples without erasing their beliefs. Reducing resistance and fostering loyalty, religion became a unifying language across the empire, binding diverse populations through shared ritual. Even as local traditions persisted, this cosmic worldview shaped Babylon's resilience. Disasters were interpreted not as meaningless tragedy, but as signals requiring response. Rituals intensified, reforms enacted, sacrifices increased. Society adapted through belief. Religion did not prevent suffering, but it provided a framework to endure it. The order of the cosmos mirrored the order of the state, both fragile, requiring constant maintenance. Babylon saw itself as the city responsible for maintaining this balance, a sacred duty that justified its power and reinforced its identity. This belief would outlast kings and empires, surviving even Babylon's destruction, carried forward in myths, texts, and memory, shaping how later cultures understood chaos, order, and the divine. In Babylon, religion was not escape from reality. It was the lens through which reality was understood, controlled, and survived. And it was this lens that allowed the city to endure when others collapsed. Because when the world makes sense, even suffering becomes bearable. And bearable suffering does not break civilizations. Empires are often remembered for how they rise, but their true nature is revealed in how they fall. And the old Babylonian empire began to unravel not through sudden destruction, but through the slow erosion of balance that Hammurabi had worked so carefully to maintain. When Hammurabi died, his empire did not collapse immediately, but it lost its most critical element, the mind that held it together. His successors inherited territory without inheriting authority, systems without the discipline that sustained them, and an empire that required constant attention in a world that never stayed still. Hammurabi's son Samsa-iluna ascended the throne, facing pressures his father had anticipated but never fully resolved. Rebellion erupted across the south almost immediately. Cities like Uruk and Lhasa that had been conquered through strategy and restraint now resisted Babylonian control. These regions had submitted to Hammurabi's authority, not necessarily to Babylon itself. And without his personal legitimacy, their loyalty fractured. Military campaigns were launched to suppress revolts, but each victory drained resources and deepened resentment. Canals were damaged during fighting, agriculture suffered, and economic stability weakened. The empire's southern heartland, once its greatest asset, became its greatest liability. As unrest persisted, Hammurabi's carefully constructed system of governance began to strain. Administrators struggled to enforce law in distant regions, communication slowed, and the cost of maintaining control grew unsustainable, while internal pressures mounted. External threats intensified. The Kassites, a people from the Zagros Mountains, began infiltrating Mesopotamia, initially as raiders and settlers, gradually embedding themselves into the political landscape. To the north, Assyria was emerging as a more aggressive power, no longer content with survival, but preparing for expansion. Babylon now faced the same dilemma it had once exploited. In others, an overextended empire vulnerable to fragmentation. Successive kings attempted to restore stability through force and reform, issuing decrees canceling debts, restoring temples, and repairing canals. But these measures were reactive rather than transformative. The underlying balance Hammurabi had maintained was gone, because balance requires authority, and authority cannot be inherited automatically. The empire contracted gradually, territories were lost, autonomy returned to once conquered cities, and Babylon's reach shrank to its core region. This contraction did not mean immediate collapse. Babylon remained significant, wealthy, and culturally influential, but it was no longer dominant. Its kings ruled a state rather than an empire, and even that state was under constant pressure. Eventually, disaster arrived not through gradual decline, but through shock. In the mid-16th century, before the Common Era, Babylon was struck by a sudden and decisive blow. A raid by the Hittite king Masili I swept through Mesopotamia and captured Babylon itself. The city was looted and its ruling dynasty overthrown. This event stunned the ancient world, because Babylon was not destroyed by a rival empire seeking control, but by a distant power whose motives were still unclear. The Hittites did not remain, they withdrew, leaving a vacuum where Babylon's ruling house had once stood. This vacuum marked the end of the old Babylonian Empire, not because Babylon ceased to exist, but because its political continuity was broken. Authority collapsed and chaos followed. Yet even in defeat, Babylon demonstrated its defining trait: survival. The city was not erased. Its temples remained. Its population endured. And its cultural memory persisted. Soon the Kassites filled the power vacuum, establishing a new dynasty that would rule Babylon for centuries, adapting its traditions while reshaping its politics. The fall of the old Babylonian Empire was not the end of Babylon's story. It was a transition, a shedding of one identity, in preparation for another. Hammurabi's empire had proven that Babylon could dominate Mesopotamia, Its collapse proved something equally important: that Babylon could endure the loss of power without losing itself. Laws continued to be copied, gods continued to be worshipped, and the idea of Babylon as a center of order survived political failure. In this sense, the empire did not truly die, it transformed. Because Babylon was never defined solely by its kings or armies, it was defined by its systems, beliefs, and memory. And these could survive conquest, looting, and humiliation. The fall of the old Babylonian Empire revealed the paradox at the heart of Babylon's resilience. Power made it vulnerable, but identity made it immortal. And this pattern would repeat again and again across centuries, as new empires rose believing they could claim Babylon, only to discover that ruling the city was easier than killing it. Babylon had fallen before, but it had also learned how to rise again. And it would do so under new rulers who understood that survival sometimes required submission, adaptation, and patience rather than resistance. When Babylon survived the fall of its first empire, it did not emerge into peace. It emerged into a world that had learned from its example, and none learned faster or more brutally than Assyria. To the north along the upper Tigris, a kingdom was transforming itself into a war machine, disciplined, organized, and relentless. Assyria did not seek balance or patience. It sought dominance through fear. And as its power expanded, Babylon found itself caught in a long and brutal struggle that would define centuries of Mesopotamian history. The Kassite kings, who now ruled Babylon, attempted to restore stability, and for a time they succeeded, adopting Babylonian culture, respecting its gods and laws, and ruling with relative restraint. But the world beyond Babylon was changing. Assyria's kings built armies unlike any before. Professional soldiers equipped with iron weapons, siege engines, and brutal tactics designed to crush resistance quickly. Cities that resisted were destroyed, populations deported, and terror used deliberately as policy. This was empire through intimidation, and it worked. As Assyria expanded southward, Babylon became both prize and problem. A city too important to ignore and too sacred to destroy lightly. Assyrian rulers understood Babylon's symbolic power. To rule it meant legitimacy. To offend its gods meant instability. And so Assyria's relationship with Babylon became complex, alternating between control, alliance, humiliation, and reverence. At times, Assyrian kings placed their own sons on Babylon's throne, ruling it indirectly. At other times, Babylon rebelled, seeking independence. Each rebellion met with devastating response. Cities burned, temples looted, and populations punished. Yet Babylon was rarely erased completely, because even Assyria feared the consequences of destroying the city of Marduk. This cycle of domination and resistance created constant instability. Babylonian elites navigated survival through diplomacy, submission, and strategic rebellion, while ordinary people endured repeated trauma. Deportations, famine, and reconstruction became familiar experiences. Assyrian kings like Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon asserted control through reorganization of territory and administration, integrating Babylon into a vast imperial system. Yet resistance never fully disappeared. Babylonian identity was too deeply rooted to vanish under occupation. The most dramatic confrontation came under Sennacherib, whose patience with Babylon finally broke. After repeated revolts, he chose annihilation over control. Babylon was captured, looted, and deliberately destroyed. Its walls torn down, temples desecrated, and its population scattered. Sennacherib boasted of flooding the city, turning it into marshland. This act shocked the ancient world because it violated religious norms and challenged divine order. The destruction of Babylon was not merely political. It was cosmic transgression, and its consequences were swift. Unrest spread across Assyria, itself interpreted as divine punishment. And after Sennacherib's assassination, his successor, Esarhaddon, reversed course, rebuilding Babylon, restoring its temples, and seeking reconciliation with Marduk. This reversal reveals Babylon's enduring power. Even in ruin, it could not be ignored. Its destruction destabilized the very empire that attempted it. Assyria learned that ruling Babylon required respect as much as force, yet the cycle continued. Assyria remained dominant militarily while Babylon remained defiant culturally. The city survived through accommodation and resistance, adapting to Assyrian control while preserving its identity. This prolonged struggle reshaped Babylon, weakening its autonomy but strengthening its symbolic role as the heart of Mesopotamian tradition. Assyria may have ruled through fear, but Babylon ruled memory, law, and belief, and these were harder to kill than armies. The Assyrian era demonstrated a brutal truth of ancient power. The strongest armies can conquer cities, but cannot easily erase meaning. Babylon endured humiliation, destruction, and subjugation, yet each time it was rebuilt because too many systems depended on its survival. Religious legitimacy, administrative tradition, and cultural continuity all flowed through Babylon, and even its enemies needed it to exist. By surviving Assyria's shadow, Babylon proved once again that it was not merely a city, but an idea resilient enough to outlast terror itself. And this resilience would soon be tested again, because Assyria's own brutality would sow the seeds of its collapse, creating one final opportunity for Babylon to rise from the ruins, not as a relic of the past, but as a reborn imperial power ready to challenge the world one last time.
Babylon had been burned, drowned, humiliated, and scattered, yet it was never erased, because destruction removes buildings, not belief. And when Assyria finally began to fracture under the weight of its own brutality, Babylon sensed the shift before anyone else. Assyria's empire was vast but brittle, held together by fear, relentless warfare, and constant expansion. Once expansion slowed, rebellion spread like fire. Internal conflict, succession struggles, and exhaustion weakened the once unstoppable machine. And in this moment of imperial decay, Babylon found its opening. A Chaldean leader named Nabopolassar emerged from the south, not as a conqueror trained in Assyrian terror, but as a survivor shaped by Babylon's long memory. He understood both resistance and restraint, and in 626 BCE, he launched a rebellion that would change history. This was not a sudden uprising, but a calculated campaign. Nabopolassar secured Babylon first, restoring temples, repairing walls, and re-establishing religious legitimacy. Because without divine favor, political rebellion meant nothing. Priests supported him, rituals intensified, and Marduk's authority was invoked once more. Babylon declared itself free, not only politically, but cosmically. This declaration resonated across Mesopotamia. Cities long oppressed by Assyrian rule saw opportunity and joined the cause. Alliances formed, not out of loyalty to Babylon, but hatred of Assyria. The Medes from the east joined Nabopolassar, creating a coalition strong enough to challenge Assyria's military might. Years of brutal warfare followed. Cities fell one by one. Assyrian forces resisted fiercely, but the balance had shifted. In 612 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, was besieged and destroyed. Its palaces burned, its power shattered. The empire that had terrorized the ancient world collapsed in fire and blood. Babylon stood at the center of this transformation, not as a passive beneficiary, but as an architect of Assyria's end. With Assyria gone, Babylon rose once more as an imperial power. But this time, its rise was different, informed by centuries of survival, defeat, and adaptation. Nabopolassar did not attempt to recreate Assyrian terror. Instead, he focused on restoration, rebuilding, and legitimacy. Babylon's walls were reconstructed, its temples restored, and its rituals revived. The city was presented not as a conqueror, but as a restorer of order after Assyrian chaos. This narrative was powerful because it aligned political authority with moral purpose. When Nabopolassar died, his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, inherited an empire already reborn, but not yet secure. Nebuchadnezzar was both warrior and builder, a king who understood that dominance required both fear and awe. His early reign was defined by military campaigns, securing Babylonians' western territories. Egypt challenged Babylonian expansion, and battles were fought across the Levant. Nebuchadnezzar emerged victorious, consolidating control over Syria, Judah, and surrounding regions. Cities that resisted were punished, others submitted, and Babylonian authority spread once again across ancient trade routes. But Nebuchadnezzar's legacy was not conquest alone, it was transformation. He turned Babylon into the greatest city the ancient world had ever seen. Walls were expanded to monumental scale, streets paved, temples adorned, and palaces constructed on an unprecedented level. Babylon became a symbol of imperial power, wealth, and divine favor. The Ishtar Gate rose, covered in glazed bricks depicting lions, dragons, and bulls. Processional ways guided rituals through the heart of the city, reinforcing Babylon's cosmic centrality. Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt Etemenanki, the great ziggurat, making it a physical manifestation of Babylon's connection between heaven and earth. This was architecture as ideology, stone and brick declaring supremacy without words. The legendary Hanging Gardens, attributed by later writers to this era, symbolized Babylon's ability to conquer nature itself. Though their historical existence remains debated, their myth reflects Babylon's reputation for excess, innovation, and grandeur. Religious life flourished under Nebuchadnezzar. Marduk's supremacy was reaffirmed, festivals expanded, and rituals intensified. Babylon presented itself once again as the axis of the universe, a city chosen to maintain cosmic order. Yet beneath this magnificence, tension remained. Empire requires constant vigilance, and Nebuchadnezzar ruled with firm authority, suppressing rebellion and enforcing loyalty. The conquest of Jerusalem and the exile of its population became one of the most famous events of his reign, remembered differently by different cultures. For Babylon, it was political necessity. For others, it was divine punishment. These differing memories illustrate the complexity of Babylon's power, admired, feared, and resented simultaneously. The Neo-Babylonian Empire reached its peak under Nebuchadnezzar. its influence stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Trade flowed, wealth accumulated, and Babylon stood unrivaled. Yet history had taught Babylon one lesson repeatedly: no empire is permanent, and even at its height, the seeds of decline were already present. Succession would be fragile, external threats persistent, and internal unity dependent on strong leadership. But for a brief moment, Babylon had achieved what few cities ever did. It rose from total destruction to absolute dominance, not once, but multiple times, proving that resilience can be as powerful as conquest. The Neo-Babylonian revival was not merely a return to power, it was a declaration that Babylon could not be killed, only transformed. And this final flowering would leave an imprint so deep that even after its fall, the name Babylon would continue to symbolize empire, ambition, decadence, and divine order for thousands of years to come. At the height of its splendor, Babylon appeared invincible, and at the center of that illusion stood Nebuchadnezzar II, a king whose name became synonymous with imperial might, monumental architecture, and divine favor. Under his rule, Babylon reached a scale of wealth, beauty, and authority unmatched in the ancient world. Yet empires do not fracture at their weakest point. They fracture at their strongest, when confidence becomes certainty, and certainty blinds judgment. Nebuchadnezzar ruled with absolute authority, commanding armies that had secured the West, defeated Egypt's ambitions, and brought rebellious regions under control. Tribute flowed into Babylon from across the Near East. Gold, silver, timber, and captives filled its storehouses. And with these resources, Nebuchadnezzar reshaped the city into a symbol of cosmic dominance. Walls thick enough for chariots to ride atop encircled Babylon. Gates covered in glazed brick proclaimed power through color and myth. Palaces expanded into vast complexes that blurred the line between royal residence and divine sanctuary. The city was no longer merely inhabited, it was performed, designed to overwhelm visitors with scale and order. Every brick inscribed with the king's name reinforced a single message: Babylon stands because Nebuchadnezzar commands it. Religion remained central to this authority. Marduk's supremacy was reaffirmed continuously through ritual and construction. Nebuchadnezzar presented himself as the god's chosen steward, rebuilding temples, restoring cult statues, and funding festivals that bound people and gods together. This devotion was genuine and political simultaneously, because divine favor justified earthly dominance. Yet absolute power requires constant reinforcement. Rebellion never fully disappeared. Provinces submitted outwardly, but resisted internally, and Nebuchadnezzar responded decisively. Deportations, forced labor, and military campaigns maintained order. The exile of populations, including those from Judah, served both punishment and control, removing potential resistance while supplying labor for imperial projects. These actions strengthened the empire materially, but weakened it socially, because fear maintains obedience only while strength remains unquestioned. Within Babylon itself, society became increasingly hierarchical. Elites benefited from imperial wealth, while commoners bore the cost of labor, taxation, and military.
When Nebuchadnezzar II died, Babylon did not fall immediately, but something essential vanished with him: the gravity that had held everything in place. His successors inherited palaces, armies, temples, and wealth, but they did not inherit legitimacy, experience, or fear. And in empires, fear fades faster than memory. The throne passed first to Amel-Marduk, a ruler remembered less for achievement and more for instability. His reign was short and troubled. Court politics turned vicious.
Nobles, priests, and generals competed for influence. Decisions reversed rapidly, and authority weakened. After only a few years, Amel-Marduk was overthrown and murdered, a sign that Babylon's political culture had shifted from reverence to survival. His successor, Neriglissar, was more capable, a military man who attempted to restore order through strength. He led campaigns, secured borders, and stabilized administration. But his reign was brief. Death once again interrupted continuity, leaving the empire in the hands of a child, Labashi-Marduk, whose rule lasted only months before he too was removed, assassinated by elites who believed the empire required an adult king. This cycle of coups and instability exposed Babylon's core weakness, succession. Without Nebuchadnezzar's authority, the balance between king, priest, and elite collapsed. Power became personal rather than institutional, and every decision became contested. Eventually, Nabonidus emerged as king, a man unlike any ruler before him, deeply religious but not politically intuitive. Nabonidus did not come from the main royal line and lacked broad support among Babylonian elites. His reign was defined by contradiction. He invested heavily in religious reform but neglected political realities. Most controversially, he elevated the moon god Sin above Marduk, challenging the ideological foundation of Babylonian identity. Priests of Marduk resisted this shift, seeing it as an attack on the city's sacred role. Tensions grew between king, temple, and population. Nabonidus further alienated elites by spending long periods away from Babylon, retreating to the oasis city of Timah, leaving his son Belshazzar to govern in his absence. This absence was catastrophic because Babylon's system depended on the physical presence of the king, performing rituals, maintaining order, and embodying divine authority. Without him, legitimacy eroded, religious festivals disrupted, and loyalty weakened. While internal cohesion fractured, external threats intensified. To the east, a new power was rising, Persia, under the leadership of Cyrus the Great. Unlike Assyria, Cyrus ruled through tolerance, integration, and psychological warfare rather than terror. He presented himself as liberator rather than conqueror, allowing local customs, religions, and elites to remain intact. This approach appealed deeply to populations exhausted by instability. As Nabonidus alienated Babylonian elites, Cyrus cultivated them, promising restoration rather than destruction. Propaganda spread quietly, portraying Persia as divinely favored and Babylon's king as impious. When Persian forces advanced, Babylon was unprepared, not militarily, but spiritually. In 539 BCE, Cyrus entered Babylon without major battle, welcomed by priests and population as restorer of order. Temples were respected, rituals restored, and Marduk honored once more. Nabonidus was captured, Belshazzar disappeared into history, and the Neo-Babylonian Empire ended not in fire, but in surrender. This quiet fall was more devastating than violent destruction because it revealed Babylon's ultimate vulnerability, loss of internal unity. Armies, walls, and wealth mean little when legitimacy collapses. Yet even in conquest, Babylon survived. Cyrus ruled it as a capital, respected its traditions, and used its administrative systems. Once again, the city adapted, absorbing a new empire into its identity. Babylon ceased to be sovereign, but not significant. Its gods, its laws, and its memory continued to shape rulers far beyond its walls. The fall of Babylon was not the death of the city, but the end of its independence, a transition from ruler to symbol, from empire to inheritance. And this transition ensured Babylon's immortality, because cities remembered for defeat fade, but cities remembered for meaning endure. Babylon's final political fall proved that its greatest power was never domination, it was survival, and survival allowed its influence to outlast kings, empires, and even history itself.
When Cyrus entered Babylon without battle, the ancient world changed silently, because for the first time in its long history, Babylon was ruled not through terror or destruction, but through accommodation. The Persian conquest did not announce itself with burning temples or shattered walls. Instead, it arrived with promises of restoration and respect. Cyrus understood something few conquerors ever did, that Babylon's power no longer lay in armies or kings, but in memory, legitimacy, and administration. Rather than erasing Babylonian identity, he absorbed it, presenting himself as chosen by Marduk to restore order after Nabonidus's failures. This narrative was carefully constructed. Inscriptions proclaimed Cyrus as liberator, restorer, and rightful ruler. Temples were reopened, rituals resumed, and priests regained status. Babylon's population experienced conquest as relief rather than catastrophe, and this made Persian rule remarkably stable. Administratively, Babylon became one of the most important cities in the Achaemenid Empire, serving as a regional capital, treasury, and administrative hub. Its scribes, accountants, and officials continued their work almost unchanged, now serving a Persian king rather than a Babylonian one. This continuity ensured efficiency, because Persian rulers relied on existing systems rather than imposing new ones blindly. Babylonian law, contracts, and economic practices persisted, and even the cuneiform script continued in use for centuries. Culturally, Babylon remained a center of learning, religion, and ritual. Temples functioned, markets thrived, and the city retained its prestige. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Babylon was no longer the source of imperial authority. It was a vessel for it, a crown jewel rather than the crown itself. Persian kings ruled vast territories from multiple capitals, Susa, Persepolis, Ecbatana, and Babylon, preventing any single city from dominating. This decentralization reduced Babylon's political leverage, but increased its longevity. Rebellion did occur. Babylon attempted to reclaim independence more than once under Persian rule, but each uprising was suppressed efficiently. The city was punished, but not erased, because Persia had learned the lesson Assyria ignored. Destroying Babylon destabilizes the region. So instead, control was maintained through administration, military presence, and selective tolerance. Over time, Babylon's role shifted further, from administrative center to cultural memory. Greek writers who visited or heard of Babylon described it with awe, fascination, and exaggeration. Stories of its walls, towers, gardens, and decadence spread across the Mediterranean world. Babylon became myth as much as place, a symbol of ancient grandeur, excess, and wisdom. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia, he too recognized Babylon's significance, choosing it as a potential imperial capital, planning to rebuild its temples and restore its glory. His sudden death halted these plans, and Babylon entered a long, gradual decline, eclipsed by newer cities and shifting trade routes. Yet even as its population dwindled, its name grew larger. Religious traditions from Babylon influenced later cultures. Biblical texts reimagined Babylon as symbol of human arrogance, divine punishment, and moral collapse. This reinterpretation detached Babylon from geography and embedded it into ideology, turning a historical city into an eternal warning.
Later writers, poets, theologians, and artists reused Babylon as a metaphor for empire, decadence, and excess, ensuring that even as ruins crumbled, the name endured. Archaeologists centuries later uncovered tablets, walls, and gates, revealing the reality behind myth, restoring Babylon to history while preserving its symbolic power. The city that once ruled by force ended by shaping thought, and in doing so achieved a form of immortality no empire could conquer. Babylon's legacy teaches a final lesson. Civilizations die when they stop adapting, but they live on when their ideas travel. Babylon survived conquest, collapse, and abandonment because it transformed from ruler to reference, from capital to concept, and that transformation made it eternal. Babylon was never just walls or kings or armies. It was an idea born between two rivers where chaos demanded intelligence and survival demanded order. It rose not once, but many times, learning from every fall, absorbing every conqueror, and reshaping every empire that claimed it. Sumerians built its foundations, Akkadians taught it empire, Amorites taught it patience, Hammurabi taught it law, Assyria taught it terror, Persia taught it tolerance, and history taught it immortality. Every empire that tried to own Babylon believed power was enough, and every empire learned the same lesson too late. You can conquer a city, but you cannot conquer its meaning. Babylon survived because it adapted. When force failed, it used law. When law failed, it used belief. When belief failed, it used memory. It understood that domination is temporary, but systems endure, that armies fade, but ideas travel. Its streets may have emptied, its temples may have fallen, and its walls may have turned to dust, but its influence moved into time itself, shaping how humans wrote laws, measured stars, ruled empires, and imagined the consequences of arrogance. Babylon became a warning and a teacher, a symbol of brilliance, ambition, excess, and collapse, whispered in scriptures, echoed in myths, and rediscovered in ruins. The city that once ruled the world outlived the world that ruled it, because Babylon was never meant to survive as stone. It was meant to survive as story. And stories do not die. They wait, waiting for someone to remember that the greatest civilizations are not those that conquer the most land, but those that leave ideas strong enough to outlive conquest itself.